All right, so we are going to continue on from our circular in our circular resource discussion. Um, and just as a quick reminder, we in the first part of this, um, I went over the idea of circular waste and zero waste, right? Remember, so our sort of typical modern human natural resource flow is linear. So it's linear resource flow, aka take, make, waste. You extract, you manufacture, you distribute, you consume. That's your main role, and then most of it ends up in the landfill. We're getting better at this, but again, this is going to be a theme in a couple of the lessons moving forward. So I want you to really think in circular terms as much as possible. We should always try to um, minimize our waste, no matter what that is, whether it's excess energy, which we'll go over in a minute, or it's organic material or plastics or whatever. We should try to close those loops as much as possible and minimize the amount that we need to extract. And one of the core ideas here is that what you see in your role, all of us in our role, is minimal compared to the actual impact that our resource use causes, right? So when we use something, we eat food, we throw something away, we buy something from a store, most of the impact is actually upstream, and most of that's invisible, and that's really important to understand. Okay, so let's look at a few applications here. Some of my favorite topics. Number one, we have anaerobic digestion, which is my favorite energy source. Yes, I have a favorite energy source, but my head's been in this space for quite a long time, and I think you'll see why. This is just a really great circular application. All right, so we'll watch this video and then we'll discuss it a little bit.
Anaerobic digestion can take organic waste materials like household food leftovers, commercial food manufacturing byproducts, farm manures, or even sewage to generate renewable energy. It has the potential to play a huge part in resolving waste management challenges and decarbonisation. But how does it actually work? Anaerobic digestion plants are fed by organic materials which we call the feedstock.
Okay, so I want to pause here and point this out. This is very, very important. The source material for anaerobic digestion is organic. It has to be organic material. Um, it could be anything from waste, what would otherwise be waste. So kitchen, quote unquote waste. Think about air quotes around the waste here. Kitchen scraps, leftovers from farming, cow manure. Cow manure is a really good source. Cows generate a lot of manure. Any kind of farming waste from restaurants, food waste. So it has to be organic. Anything organic actually can be used in anaerobic digestion, and so that's what they're collecting here. And I'll show you a couple different examples of how you can actually collect it. All right, so start with this, what's called a feedstock. You want to jot that term down, feedstock. Has to be organic. Okay.
Of household food waste, delivery of waste products from the food processing sector, or collection of manure or crop residues from the farm next door. While some types of feedstock are ready to go straight into the digester, others need some preparation to allow them to be effectively broken down once they enter the tank. Food waste feedstocks are often passed through a depackaging unit to remove indigestible materials like plastics, which can be recycled or disposed of separately. Once ready, the feedstock is put into the digestion tank. Microorganisms break down the organic materials in the absence of oxygen to create an anaerobic environment.
Okay, very, very important. Jot this down. Anaerobic. That means without oxygen or low oxygen. So the key for this to work, and this is fundamental to understand, is you take that organic material, as I said, they get rid of everything non-organic like plastics and so forth. You put organic material in a tank. This is a sealed tank. It could be any size, and again, I'll show you a couple examples of this, but it has to be sealed. And what you do is you starve it of oxygen. All right, so it has to be a low oxygen environment. And as you'll see, that actually can happen sort of naturally in a landfill. But this is manipulated. Okay, so anaerobic is very, very important. It's not going to work if there's oxygen in there. Different bacteria come in there and it generates CO2, and it's not going to work. Okay, so it needs to be anaerobic.
The tank functions almost like a mechanical cow's stomach, breaking down the feedstock into smaller parts, which releases a substance called biogas.
Okay, so she mentioned there this is like a cow's stomach. We'll actually talk about this when we talk go over our food lesson. This is what's called enteric fermentation in a cow. Cows, if you know, they're burps and to a lesser degree they're farts, but they're burps primarily. That's actually mostly methane, and that's because the same process that happens in an anaerobic digestion tank happens in a cow stomach. And you can see what happens when you have an anaerobic, if you have anaerobic conditions and you have the right bacteria, it breaks down this organic material and it converts it. You can see here mostly methane. If you remember from the climate change lesson, methane is what gives natural gas its energy. Okay? And then there's some CO2 and some other stuff. This is the key. You're trying to generate this methane. That's what you want to do. You want to generate the methane because then you can use that for natural gas, burn it for energy, heat, heat, electricity in a generator, whatever. Okay, so that's really what we're trying to do. So I expect you to understand that. You start with organic material, you put it in an anaerobic set of conditions with the right bacteria, and then it's going to convert it mostly to methane and some CO2. If you took that same organic material, okay, and let's say it's an apple core, right? I'm eating an apple. So instead of putting in this anaerobic digestion system, if I just throw it out, in nature, it's gonna bacteria are gonna come, they're gonna digest it, but when they do that, it's almost entirely carbon dioxide, right? It's gonna convert it back to CO2 because there's oxygen. Okay, so if there's oxygen, ample oxygen, it's going to mostly convert to CO2. If it's anaerobic, it's going to convert mostly to methane. That's the key here. That's why you go through this whole process.
Biogas can be used in a CHP engine to generate electricity to power homes and businesses. It can also be upgraded to produce biomethane, the renewable equivalent of natural gas. This can then be injected into the national grid to be used in home boilers and for cooking. The upgrading process can be coupled with carbon capture and storage, meaning any carbon dioxide present in the biogas can be used in other industries, such as the food processing industry. Anaerobic digestion also produces solid and liquid nutrient-rich biofertilizers. These can be applied to agricultural lands as an alternative to chemically produced fertilizer products.
Okay, another important thing to point out. In addition to generating methane, so most of the organic materials converted into methane, some CO2, which you can, as she said, you can capture and you can use it, you can store it. There's some technologies that we won't really go over, but there are ways to capture it. But then what you're left with at the end are these it's like a biosolid basically. So it's a rich organic material. So there is some leftover. It's not all converted to gas, and I'll show you a picture of that. That is actually really good soil amendment, really good rich organic material that can be added to farms. And so that's the last step of the circular process, right? So just imagine, let's take a step back. You grow food on a farm and then you process it and there's some leftovers, right? So then you send it to the anaerobic digester, you generate methane, and then you can use that to run a generator or heat or ship put it into the regular natural gas system. And then what you're left with is organic material that you put back on your farm, and then you kind of keep going. So that's how it can be really circular. So it's a really cool technology. It is used, not many people know about it, but it is used all over the world, including the United States and including locally here in Delaware. But pretty interesting
This is
process.
very cost effective for the farmer and better for the environment, as existing nutrients are being recycled back to the land.
Okay, so that's your overview of anaerobic digestion. So here's a nice little diagram. Um, you can see you can have these, the different inputs. There's different ways to do this, but it has to be organic. You put it in this sealed tank with the right bacteria, then you generate what's called biogas, sometimes called green gas now. Um, and you can use that for whatever you use natural gas for electricity, heat, etc. And then you have this digestate, which is left over, nice rich organic fertilizer. You can use it in animal bedding, you can use it in other stuff, right? So this is circular in that you take organic material that's then processed, and you're pulling out the methane using that, and then you're putting the organic material back into the soil. Um, the other important thing to point out about this, because when you burn methane, it actually generates CO2, but this is a carbon neutral. You should know what this means, a carbon neutral energy source, meaning any CO2, so if you pull that methane out, you generate that methane, you burn it, any CO2 that's released came from the organic material, right? So the easiest thing to think about is you have, some sort of crop. Let's say it's wheat crop. So wheat pulls CO2 from the air, and then you harvest it, and then you process that organic material in an anaerobic digester. You generate some methane. You burn the methane. Okay, you release CO2, but it's by the laws of physics, less than. I mean, it can kind of, I guess, sort of be equal to. Basically, it's the same amount or less than that wheat actually pulled from the atmosphere in the first place. So basically, you're pulling CO2 here, you're releasing it here, and it all balances out, and so it's carbon neutral or net zero, if you will. Okay, so that's anaerobic digestion. Really cool. There's a bunch of different ways to do this. These are actually pictures I took in my various travels with students at Delaware Tech over the years. This is an anaerobic digester in Switzerland. It's on a smallish farm. There's your digestate tank. And I don't know, I don't have you can actually click on this link to look at the blog, and there's a really full description of all this. So I'm not going to go over in a whole bunch of detail, but that's your tank. They actually had a really cool operation, just a family farm, like 5 or 6 people, and they actually had a truck, and they went and they got food scraps from restaurants and left things that the grocery stores were throwing out, and they would pull it apart, get rid of the plastic, and then put it in the tank, digest it, and then there was a generator here, um, and it looked a lot like this but smaller, and so they actually generated electricity, which they used on their farm and they used for their house, and they actually sold the rest to the grid. And then what's really cool is they have leftover heat. So when you use a generator, if you've ever been around a generator, it gets really hot. Actually, most of the energy that goes into it is wasted as heat, normally wasted. And so I'll talk about cogeneration in a minute, but what they had, actually, let me show you. Here's a picture of cogeneration, because they had this on that farm. And so a typical generator, or power plant for that matter, which is, power plant is just, basically a bunch of giant generators, a whole bunch of big generators. If your fuel goes into a power plant or a generator, the typical efficiencies in the 30 to 40% range, which means that about 60 to 70% of all the energy that goes in is actually wasted as heat. Coal-fired power plants on average are like 33% efficient. That means 67% of the energy in the coal is wasted. Natural gas tends to be a little more efficient. Nuclear is about the same, 33, 35%. Okay, so that's typical. And if you had like a generator, a household generator, if someone has a generator and on their property, they're actually probably less efficient than this. So if you have cogeneration, you want to jot down this term cogeneration, or combined heat and power. You have all this waste heat. So heat can be useful, and so with cogeneration, what you do is you generate the electricity, you use that, but then you capture the heat. And you can use this for any number of applications. In this, let me see up here, this generator, on this farm, sorry, back to the original example, on this farm, they used that heat to actually operate, heat the building, right? Heat the farm, provide heat for their animals, greenhouses, etc. But the anaerobic digestion also needs to be warm, and so they use the quote unquote waste heat to continue to help facilitate the anaerobic digestion. And so I remember talking to him, and he said overall it's like 90% of the energy in that generator they use, which means only 10% waste, which is amazing. This is actually a picture of a cogeneration plant in Denmark. Okay, so this is a bigger operation. This is really, really, really cool. I love this place. It's cooperatively owned. All the local farmers actually own this cooperatively, so they all benefit equally. There's no, shareholders. There's no private owner. It's all cooperatively owned and managed. Here's the anaerobic digester tanks. And what they do is they actually, all of the local farms around it, there's actually basically underground pipelines of cow manure and just flows right into the system. And then they use, farm waste, various farm waste, whatever. And then they use the digester. They run this giant generator. This is really cool. Also, cogeneration. They generate electricity that they then provide to all of the cooperative owners. They sell it to the grid, but they have what's called district heating. And so all of that, what's normally waste heat, they actually capture it, put it in, it's either water or like an antifreeze so it doesn't freeze. So basically they capture it, put it in a liquid, and they have a series of underground pipelines that go flow out to all the buildings in town. And they use that hot water to heat their house, for their hot water in their house, etc. So they actually use the electricity. So the farms generate waste, organic waste, and then they ship the waste here, and then the waste is converted to methane, which they burn in a generator, which then they use the electricity for their farms and for the local town, and all the heat that's generated from the generator they use for heating for the local farms and the town. And finally, to close the loop, it's a little bit hard to see, but this is digestate. It's just it's the leftover stuff, and it's just rich organic material. It doesn't smell. It smells kind of good if you're familiar with compost. It smells like good compost, and that's what they apply to their farms. So really great closed loop or circular resource use application. And you can scale this up and down. That's one of the great things about it. This is actually up in uh, I always forget the name of the college, but it's in Carlisle, Pennsylvania. Um, and this was just a little student project actually, and this is actually their digestate tank. It's just a big rubber bladder, and they use it to operate their greenhouse. It's a little mini farm that they have, a student-run farm. Really cool operation, and they use it to run their greenhouse, and they have like a grill that they cook stuff on. This is proposed in Seaford, Delaware. I don't know if that ever actually happened. I couldn't figure that out. This is in over in Pennsylvania. So again, this is something that people do. It's not like this super foreign technology. It would be great if more people used it. A very similar application is something called landfill gas, excuse me. And so this is the same process as anaerobic digestion. So if you think about organic material that's buried in a landfill, think about it underneath all of this, stuff in the landfill. Well, guess what? Underneath all of that stuff, there's very little oxygen. So you have anaerobic conditions. And so any organic material that ends up in the landfill, most of it ends up being converted to methane. So that, if you remember from the climate change lesson, is really bad. Methane, if you recall, is like somewhere 25 to 30 times, captures 25 to 30 times more heat than carbon dioxide. And so there's a lot of reasons not to throw organic material into the trash. I mean, personally, I hate it because it makes the trash really get gross and smelly. But also, you could use those resources, you could compost them, so that's considered a waste. But also, and possibly most importantly, if that gets into a landfill, it's almost certainly going to be converted mostly to methane, and then it's just going to leak out. You can't, it's really hard to prevent that from leaking out. And so if you look at, they actually have done this with infrared cameras, and you fly over a landfill and you just see all of this methane just like basically gushing out of the landfill from all of the organic material that's in there. And so what you can do, that's called landfill gas. So what you can actually do, instead of letting it leak out, is you can capture it. If you're making this presentation from Delaware, and our landfill up here in Newcastle County has the Cherry Island landfill, excuse me, actually has a landfill gas collection system, and you can see it here. And so there's a series of pipes that are buried here that are perforated. There's pumps that pull out the methane, and then they actually capture the methane, and then they sort of clean it up, and they sell it to the grid. So you can do that. There's all kinds of landfill gas operations all over the world and in the United States. Not the best application, but look, people are going to throw away organic material. It's just how it goes. And so if it's going to end up in the landfill, it's a good idea to capture that using landfill. Here's a good diagram. You can see you cap it like this to prevent the methane from leaking out. You have perforated pipes that are buried, and then you have, you sort of pull it out with a pump. This is very common, so there are almost 600 of these in the United States. So this is not something that people know much about, but it is pretty common. Yeah, I mean, you look at different numbers, 50-50, 60-40. But anyway, there's methane generated. And again, you don't want to emit that because it's really bad. It also reduces odor because these are capped and local ozone. So a lot of benefits to this. Just to give you some numbers, again, this is near Wilmington, Delaware, where I am. The landfill gas generates about 5,000 cubic feet per minute, which is 50 ccfs, which is, for a reference, the average household uses, if they have gas heat, I think they use about 400 ccfs a year, right? And so that's a lot of methane. That's every hour. And so that's quite a bit. Again, that would just be leaked out into the atmosphere and cause increase, warming of the climate. So it's a good resource that you could otherwise use. And then finally, I want to talk about aquaponics. Aquaponics, another one of my favorite applications. Very, very, very circular. This is one of the most circular resource flows that we'll encounter. And so there were some videos here, but I'll go over the quick summary. So basically, you have a fish tank. Tilapia is really popular fish for that because you can eat it, and it's useful in this application. So you have a tank of fish, and then you have this. I don't like this diagram. It's actually soil-less, so no soil. It's just water. So you have plants up here, usually like a leafy green. There's some other. You're not really growing like tomatoes or anything like that, but you can grow food crops. Okay, so you have your vegetable layer and then you have your fish layer. So, fish. Fish eat, fish poop. So there's no really beginning here, but we'll call that the beginning. So if you've ever had a fish tank, you know you need a filter to filter the water. You need to manage the pH and keep the water clean. Well, the problem is when fish poop ends up being toxic. So if it builds up too much, it's actually toxic and it'll kill the fish. That's why you need a filter to filter the water in a fish tank. And so with this aquaponic system, what you do is you take that, what would normally be waste. So you have the fish waste, and you have bacteria, specific bacteria in there that convert the fish waste, which has a lot of ammonia, into ammonia, and it converts it to nitrate or nitrite. I can never remember, but it's not super important. Basically, it breaks it down and makes it non-toxic. And then you have a pump that takes that up. So you have these nitrates or nitrites. It's nitrogen, basically. And that is then pulled up into the plants. And guess what plants love to help them photosynthesize? They like nitrogen. Nitrogen, it depends on the plant, but you have the right plants, they like nitrogen. Nitrogen is really good for growing foliage, if you're familiar with that. And so they have this nitrogen-rich water that goes up here. The plants use the nitrogen, and they clean the water. And then you have this clean water that flows back into the fish tank. And guess what? The fish poop in it again. The bacteria convert it into useful plant food, pumps it back up. The plants use it, clean it up, and on you go. So this is great. It grows the plants, it grows the fish. You can then farm the fish, use them for meat. You can obviously eat the plants, and you just keep on flowing. And really, all you need is the right setup. You need to maintain it, have the right pH and all that sort of thing. And then a little bit of electricity to pump, not much, pump the water around, and that's really it. So this is really great. It's the general, what you'll read out there is about 90% less water. So if you grow the same crops in the ground, this uses about 90% less water. The water just keeps circulating around. There's like a little bit of evaporation, and you have to replenish very minimally. You don't need any artificial fertilizers because the fish provide it. Now you have to feed the fish, obviously, so that's the other input. You're producing both vegetables and meat, so there's a yield here. It's scalable. You can do this literally in your living room and use a regular sized fish tank. I've seen them. Pretty easy to make actually. It's very self-contained. Very few inputs. You have to feed the fish and replace some of the water. That's about it. It's also really great, something you would call appropriate technology. And this is an interesting term that you may encounter in the sustainability world. What appropriate technology means is when you um, provide some sort of technology to a certain population, right? So there's this sort of classic examples of like we go to rural parts of Ethiopia or some other country in Africa, sub-Saharan Africa, and you install these solar panels, right? And you're like, here's your solar, here's how they work. Enjoy your electricity, and it's all good. It's great. Problem is if you leave and if the people don't know how to fix them, they don't know how to maintain them. They might have issues with, people being destructive or stealing things or whatever. So basically, when a technology is deployed with a specific population, this happens a lot with like lower income parts of the world where people go over and they try to help. They dig a well, they put in a wind turbine, they, establish some sort of food system, whatever. You want to make sure that they're able to take control of it on their own, right? And that's the idea of appropriate technology. You want the technology to be appropriate, if you will. And so you don't want to go in and just sort of drop parachute in and like provide some resource that then is going to end up not really benefiting them in the long term because they don't have the self-sufficiency in order to provide for themselves with that technology. And so you want to be careful. So one of the nice things about aquaponics is the principles are pretty straightforward and you can use whatever resources you have locally. So it's not this high level technology that you need, massive amounts of training and resources. You can buy this with off the shelf parts. You can go down to your local department store and buy enough today to go and build your own system. Go grab some fish and the right plants, and then, but everything else, relatively inexpensive, relatively easy to make. Okay, so, but for our purposes, one of the great things is it's very circular. Okay, this is a very circular application. Okay, so that finishes up the circular resource use part of the lesson. So hopefully you have a pretty good understanding of what circular resource means and some applications of it.